We are so fortunate to live in a community with so many conservation areas that reflect the natural beauty of our open spaces, woodlands, and coastal habitat.
In a few moments, we're going to take you on an adventure to one of those places that you'll want to go back and visit on your own.
Welcome to Trails of Discovery with your co-hosts Bob Mellers
And Sky Thaxter.
Trails of Discovery is a series that explores our natural resources that exist practically in your backyard here in Hingham and our surrounding communities.
Today we're going to Jacob's Meadow, located behind Wilder Nursery School, with two entrances to the property. The first entrance is at the Lehner property on South Pleasant Street in Hingham, with parking near the entrance. The second is behind Wilder Nursery School, which is accessible when the school is closed, such as holidays, weekends, and summer months.
Just a few words on the proper dress and some precautions one should take during your outdoor adventures. Carry plenty of water and a snack for quick energy. Bug repellent and sunscreen are good to have, as well as a hat. Because of the potential for tick exposure, wear lightly colored clothes and a long sleeve shirt and pants with the pant legs tucked inside your socks, as seen here with Sky. You can also purchase spray to use on your clothes. With us today to explore this area, we have Steve Ivas. Steve is a wetland scientist and naturalist.
Well, Bob, thanks for inviting me back to join your program again. And the way we're going to go to Jacob's Meadows is right through this field. You saw this field in our last program. Why don't we go this way?
Well, it looks like we've come to a wet area on our way to Jacob's Meadow.
Yes, Bob. This is called Potter's Field. It's at the headwaters of a wetland, which is the highest elevation of a wetland. What I'd like to do is show you how this specific species of grass has grown higher than its cousins right next door. Notice how high this grass is? Well, what it's hiding is a ditch here that was probably done by a farmer a long time ago. And there's flowing water in the ditch here, and the grass is high, and it's less high here. What I'm also seeing here is skunk cabbage, which we did not see here in late fall because all the leaves had decomposed already. There's one other thing that's interesting here, and that is we're just seeing the sensitive fern pop up, and we may see some more sensitive fern later on in the show. We also have soft rush in front of us here, which is this round-stemmed plant. Rushes are round, sedges have edges. There's one other thing I'd like to show you, and if the camera can get this, it's what you see as a fiddlehead right here. This is cinnamon fern coming up in the wetland as well. I am sort of sloshing around here because the water is a lot higher than it usually is during the growing season. Okay, Bob and Sky, we're going straight here or off to the left. Oh, guys, I'd like to show you something. You stay on the trail here, please, and let me wander off into the bush here. The first thing is this large lump here on this downed black cherry. It's called a burl. We really don't know much about them, but they make wonderful bowls. People carve bowls out of them in this area. There's a couple of other things to show you here. The first one is this mix of poison ivy and woodbine or Virginia creeper. Poison ivy has 3 leaves, and it's a reddish leaf at this time of year. It's a red-green leaf, whereas the woodbine has a more yellow-green leaf, and it has 5 leaves, which I find very interesting. People get them mixed up all the time. There's one other thing I'd like to show you, which is northern spice bush. It's almost ready to bloom, and it'll be a beautiful, beautiful yellow flower along with the leaves. But this spice bush has a volatile oil that's in the family of other oils like hay scent, peppermint, and wintergreen. If you'd like to smell that, Bob, it's a volatile oil.
Smells like shaving cream. Wow, Steve, look at the water coming right out of the ground.
Absolutely. This is a really interesting location. We've got a groundwater discharge that's actually at the headwaters of another system going down into Fulling Mill Brook. And this scrub shrub swamp that we can see out here is actually the headwaters wetland of this little system. In back of us, to our westerly side, there's an esker, again, that ice channel filling, and it's got to have 20 feet of elevation up above us. So this is very, very dry above us, and this is very, very wet. You wouldn't want to walk through that area. It's a scrub shrub swamp again, with a large maple snag right there that has it's probably poison ivy vines all the way up it. It's probably been standing there for the last 20 years or so. Okay, guys, I want to go off trail here a little bit and show you a couple of really interesting things. The first one is a snail that I found on a skunk cabbage leaf right here. The second one is one of my favorite plants of wetlands. It's called spotted jewelweed, or spotted touch-me-not, or jewelweed. It's a yellow blossom. It's a hollow stem, and it helps with poison ivy. When you have poison ivy, it soothes the poison ivy itches. There are also Vinca Minor here, this small plant with a blue flower this time of year, also called periwinkle. I can see that the deer like my jewelweed as well, because we can see the deer have eaten some of them here. We also have silky dogwood that is growing up in here. And we have, excellent. We have Jack in the Pulpit growing up in this area right over here. We've got 2 Jack in the Pulpits. They are plants that require lots of very heavy organic soil within wetlands with which to grow. Bob, let's go check out the upland area close by here.
Steve, you mentioned garlic mustard as an invasive species. Are there any other invasive species that you see?
Yes, I see at least 1, 2, 3 right here in this little upland area at the toe of the slope of the esker, just past our groundwater discharge, a little to the north. The first one I'd like to talk about is the tree species that's growing next to the large, mature eastern white pine. This is called Norway Maple. It's a invasive from Europe that doesn't allow other things to grow under the tree itself in many places. The leaf itself is much larger than we saw it 2 weeks ago, and it has a milky sap. This is how you identify it between sugar maple and Norway maple. So the invasive has the milky sap. It can be seen easily if you take a leaf off and just look at the sap in the leaf right there. The second thing I'd like to talk about is the Japanese barberry. We have some nice yellow flowers here, which will make nice yellow berries that the birds will eat and distribute all over the woodland. It's a landscape plant that was brought into the country as a landscaping plant. It looks very nice in some people's yards, but it's spread all over the entire Northeast, and is now going into some wetland areas out in western Massachusetts. The third plant is a vine. This is the Asian bittersweet. It will effectively strangle trees and actually bring them down over time. It can grow very large, and it has an orange root, so it can be identified very easily. It's also got a very light brown, bumpy bark that can be identified. Now, there's one other species here that a lot of folks think that it's invasive, but is not. It's the common Greenbrier. Right here, it's interesting because its stem is green, and it photosynthesizes all during the winter when the temperature is above biological zero, or 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Useful for very good wildlife habitat, for small mammals. Rabbits are found in it, and its berry is also a very good wildlife food.
Looks like we've come to a big valley.
Yes, Bob. Behind us is a large slope down to a flat plain where the wetlands are and where Fulling Mill Brook is even further to the east. What we have here is maybe a Kame Delta in glaciology terms. It's an area that actually took and is the outwash from the glacier and the esker here that goes into a delta into a large glacial lake. So that's my guess as to what this landform is. Interesting, isn't it?
It is. Steve, let's go over and look at this giant granite rock.
Sure. Sky, we're here at Glad-Tidings Rock. I understand this is a significant rock in Hingham's history, and you know a lot more about it than I do. So could you continue and tell us about it?
Farther along the trail, the Glad-Tidings Rock is visible through the trees and scrub. The promontory is part of early Hingham lore. By some chronicles, it was the site of the killing of the Hingham man by Native Americans during the King Philip's War. Charlie Berry, a member of the Hingham Land Conservation Commission for many years, said it's more likely that the name recalls the rescue of a lost girl by a man who spotted her while he was standing atop the outcrop.
This is a large piece of granite ledge here, and it demonstrates ecological succession very, very well. For example, there is some lichen right up in here that eventually gets covered with moss, that eventually gets covered with ferns, that eventually gets covered with soil, and now we have some herbaceous layer plants growing here. We've got the Canadian Mayflower, also called false lily of the valley here. We've got some poison ivy growing up in here. We've got black cherry. There's a tree right behind me, also black cherry. And there is a failing soil area here. This is a small eastern white pine. It's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 or 7 years old that has been growing in the soil up on this rock. And notice the soil has come away from the rock. So this pine will not succeed. However, there are other mature pines that have got to be 60 to 75 years old on the rock, living. There are also some cherries further up gradient, and we can even see a dead small eastern white pine, 5 or 6 years old, directly above me on the rock here. It's a really, really good site to show what happens over the last 10,000 years on top of rocks and boulders in New England.
Steve, what can you tell me about this dead tree?
This one is an eastern white pine, and note its rapid state of decomposition. It's giving back to the soil. You can see that some of it's going back to the soil here. It's probably been standing for probably 20 years or so. And look at all these little things right here. Do you know what these are?
Old branches?
Old branches, exactly. These are the knots that you see in pine boards when they're cut a certain way. They're old branches, and they're a lot stronger than the hardwood here. This hardwood provided homes for maybe termites, carpenter ants, woodpeckers, and all kinds of other insects.
Is that what has created this sort of mosaic pattern?
Yes.
Hey, let's go over and see those dead trees over there.
Oh, very interesting. Walking through to an open area. This is really interesting. We can see some standing dead eastern white pines, some very large trees. And notice on the ground floor, our herbaceous story is now nothing but thousands of small eastern white pines that are now growing because they have sunlight that has been allowed since the trees have lost their branches.
They seem to be mixed in with some mature trees as well.
Yes, there's some mature trees here. There's some red oaks and mostly eastern white pines, and there's even a couple of American beeches that are just they're just popping out here. You see the small leaves right up in here. You see that? Beautiful, beautiful this time of year, absolutely.
So Steve, would you call this like a cycle of life?
Yes, indeed. We've got the oldest trees around that are going to come down in the next few years, and then we've got the youngest trees starting up. So this will be a forest like this in another 70 or 100 years.
We stand today next to a boulder dedicated to Miss Burns in 1991. In 1963, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring awakened a nation to environmental peril. Hingham was one of the towns recognized for its leadership in conservation. In 1959, the Hingham Conservation Commission was established, prompted by the letters to the Hingham Journal by John P. Richardson. One of their first projects was to save home meadows and conserve the shores along Ware River and Foundry Pond. One of its first supporters was Helen Burns, who contributed 8 acres along Fully Mill Brook. She was also involved in the founding of the Hingham Land Trust in 1972. She gave an additional 30 acres to them in what today is known as Jacob's Meadow.
Well, guys, we have a field here that's been cut, but look at all the black swallowwort coming up. Wow. This is a really, really invasive species, and it's in the milkweed family. It has little pods like milkweed, and it grows like crazy, and it's very, very difficult to eradicate. I dug, in my own lawn, I dug some out back a few years ago, and it's still coming back. It's very, very hard to get rid of. It smells terrible, and it's also called dog strangler vine for obvious reasons. Dogs don't like it either. Here we are at a ponding area on the Jacobs Meadow property. It's really, really interesting. I just saw some tadpoles over in the tussock sedges over in there that are almost flooded out here. The reason it's interesting is that these red maples, these large mature trees, are living on hummocks above the water. Their roots are just above the water so they can get oxygen from the air as well as carbon dioxide from the air and put it into the tree. These hummocks are very old root masses, probably from some other red maples that came down, and their root masses formed a little pile of soil eventually once it decomposed, and where the root mass came out of has a little pit, and wetlands are called pit and mound topography. So we're seeing the very edge of the wetland here as a pit and mound topography. We're also seeing one other species that's dominating, and that's called sweet or coast pepperbush, which is a wetland species. It has a very sweet smell in mid-July, sort of like peppermint stick ice cream.
Why is it called pepper bush?
Well, the seeds, which are right here, look like small little peppers. Okay, there's another one that's very similar to pepper bush called maleberry, also little seeds, very round like that. Earlier in the season, we heard lots of wood frogs and spring peepers in this pond. That is actually, its elevation is restricted by the channel outside the pond that somebody has dug as a drainage channel, probably again to try to drain the area around the pond. Here I am at the eastern edge of Jacobs Meadow, and I'm in front of a small, what I call a vernal pond. It's an area that probably doesn't breed any of the amphibian species because it's not deep enough at this time of year. It needs about 7 inches minimum in order to be very viable for wood frogs and yellow spotted salamanders. It's probably 3 inches in the middle, and when we were here a month ago, it was probably over a foot deep. So it's one of these ponds that loses its water during the season as the grasses and shrubs use the water up.
We've come to an interesting forest.
Yes, Bob, indeed. This is an upland red cedar forest. Red cedar is a plant that likes direct sunlight. Notice we came by some in the forest that were dead because they had been overshadowed by the larger trees. They create a very, very good habitat for wildlife with their berries and their dense branches. So it's used as a nesting spot. It's also used as food source for a lot of birds and small mammals.
Well, this has been quite an adventure today, and thank you, Steve, for sharing your knowledge with us.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure, Bob.
I hope you have enjoyed it as much as we have. And besides, there are many more areas and trails for you to explore. But for us, it's that time to say goodbye until next time on Trails of Discovery.